if a beloved pastor was hiding the darkest secret imaginable. It started with a missing woman. But what detectives uncovered shook an entire community. Stay with me. This story only gets darker. Dear listeners, before we move ahead, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 goal. Pastor Nathaniel Carter was a man who had built his life on faith and devotion. As the leader of Evergreen Church in Houston, he was widely respected for his charisma, humility, and unwavering commitment to his congregation. His sermons inspired countless people, and his ability to connect with his church members made him a beloved figure in the community. Nathaniel's faith was unshakable, serving as an example for many, and his wife, Catherine, was no less admired. She was known for her patience and dedication, both as a mother and as a pastor's wife. Together, they had 2 children, a teenage daughter named Lily and a young son, Jacob, who were often seen helping around the church, reflecting the strong Christian values Nathaniel preached. The Carter family presented the ideal image of faith and unity, admired by everyone who knew them. But behind this picture-perfect family lay a dark and hidden truth. Catherine's mother, Margaret Hayes, had recently lost her husband to illness. Struggling to adjust to life without him and unable to afford a place of her own, she moved in with the Carter family. Margaret was a striking woman, still exuding grace and elegance in her late 60s. Despite her age, there was an undeniable energy about her, a timeless beauty, a quiet strength, and an air of mystery that made her stand out in any crowd. Catherine welcomed her mother into their home with open arms, never suspecting that this decision would set off a chain of events that would change everything. It didn't take long for Nathaniel and Margaret to form an unexpected bond. What began as a simple companionship, a widow offering wisdom to a pastor burdened with responsibilities, soon evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Margaret's maturity, understanding, and graceful presence provided Nathaniel with a sense of peace that Catherine, occupied with her role as a wife and mother, could not always offer. At first, Nathaniel dismissed his growing feelings as harmless admiration, a natural appreciation for an older woman's kindness and insight. But over time, their late-night conversations stretched longer. Their interactions became more personal, and the boundaries between guidance and intimacy blurred. Margaret, despite her age, was still a woman with desires and unspoken longings. Nathaniel, a man of deep faith and strong convictions, found himself conflicted yet drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He had made vows to Catherine, to his congregation, and most importantly, to God. Yet, despite his guilt, he couldn't resist her. And then, one fateful night, everything changed. What had once been a source of emotional comfort and understanding turned into something forbidden. The boundaries they had once respected vanished, and their relationship transformed into a secret, passionate affair, one that neither of them could take back. Margaret's pregnancy came as a devastating shock to both of them. The revelation threatened to shatter everything Nathaniel had built: his marriage, his family, his church, and his carefully maintained reputation. The weight of his actions became unbearable. Yet there was no way to undo what had already been done. Margaret's pregnancy was a ticking time bomb, one that could explode at any moment, exposing their darkest secret. Fear and tension consumed their every interaction, as they desperately tried to hide the truth from Catherine and the congregation. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves. Catherine began to notice the subtle changes in her mother's behavior. Once vibrant and engaged, Margaret had become distant, withdrawn, and uncharacteristically cold. She distanced herself from family activities, often citing fatigue as an excuse. Though Catherine initially attributed this to the grief of losing her husband, a nagging feeling in the back of her mind told her something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Nathaniel struggled with crippling guilt and fear. A man who had always prided himself on his moral integrity was now drowning in shame and regret. The weight of his actions haunted him, making it impossible to focus on his ministry. As time passed, his once calm and composed demeanor gave way to irritability, distraction, and paranoia. His sermons lacked their usual fire. His congregation noticed his detachment, and one man in particular, Daniel Whitmore, a longtime church member and a keen observer of human behavior, began to suspect something was wrong. Daniel had always admired Nathaniel, but something about his recent behavior unsettled him. He noticed how Nathaniel avoided Catherine more often, how his interactions with Margaret were marked by uneasy glances and lingering silences. Though Daniel had no solid evidence, his instincts told him that something deeply troubling was unfolding behind closed doors. Catherine, too, could no longer ignore the signs. She had always believed in her husband's unwavering faith and integrity, but now a seed of doubt had been planted in her heart. She noticed the stolen glances between Nathaniel and Margaret, the way his gaze lingered just a little too long, the way they exchanged awkward, forced smiles whenever they crossed paths in the hallway. One evening, as the family sat together after dinner, Catherine noticed that Margaret looked unusually pale. Concerned, she asked if everything was all right. Margaret offered a weak smile, brushing it off. "Just a little tired, dear." But Catherine wasn't convinced. There was something off in her mother's voice, an unease she couldn't quite place. As days passed, Margaret's condition worsened. Her pregnancy, though still hidden, was beginning to take a physical toll. She withdrew further, her once graceful presence overshadowed by a silent struggle. Catherine, still unaware of the true nature of the situation, grew more worried. She attributed her mother's change in behavior to stress and grief, but deep down, an unshakable feeling of suspicion had taken root. And as Nathaniel's guilt deepened and Daniel's suspicions grew stronger, the truth edged closer to being exposed. The question was no longer if their secret would come out. It was when. Daniel Whitmore had a sharp intuition, and it didn't take long for him to sense that something was deeply wrong. Subtly but deliberately, he began to observe Nathaniel Carter and Margaret Hayes, noticing the small but telling interactions between them. Something had changed, something significant. And as Daniel pieced together the clues, his instincts told him that this wasn't just a coincidence. One morning, Catherine woke up to an unsettling realization. Her mother, Margaret, was missing. It wasn't like her to be absent from the breakfast table, and as the minutes stretched into hours, Catherine's concern turned into full-blown panic. She tried calling her mother, but there was no answer. At first, Nathaniel attempted to reassure her, suggesting that Margaret had simply gone for a morning walk. But as the day wore on with no sign of her return, even he couldn't hide his growing unease. When the police got involved, Detective Andrea Langston, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for uncovering the truth, took charge of the case. As she spoke with Catherine, it became clear to her that this was not a case of illness or temporary distress. This was something much deeper, much darker. 3 days later, a group of hikers made a grim discovery on the outskirts of Houston, a woman's body. What the authorities found left the entire community in shock. Margaret had suffered severe injuries, her body bearing signs of struggle and pain. But what made the situation even more horrifying was that Margaret had been mere days away from giving birth. The brutality of the scene raised far more questions than answers. The investigation intensified. Who had done this, and more importantly, why? News of Margaret's tragic death sent waves of disbelief and fear through the congregation. The Carter family, once seen as the epitome of faith and righteousness, was now at the center of a scandal that no one had seen coming. Nathaniel's grief, guilt, and anxiety became more visible, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. As Detective Langston's investigation progressed, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. But the ultimate question remained: could Nathaniel protect the truth? Or would his past sins finally catch up to him? When authorities officially identified Margaret Hayes's body, a chilling discovery followed: a blood-stained sheet, evidence that she had fought for her life in her final moments. It was a brutal confirmation that she had not simply disappeared, she had been murdered. The revelation sent shockwaves through the public. The Carter family, once revered for their faith and devotion, was now caught in the middle of a scandal that had shattered their reputation. For Catherine, the news was devastating. The very home she had welcomed her mother into had become the place where she had met her tragic end. The overwhelming grief of losing Margaret in such a horrifying manner left her struggling to comprehend who could have done such a thing, and why. Nathaniel publicly expressed his grief, but inside he was drowning in fear and paranoia. He knew the truth was coming closer to the surface, and if exposed, it would destroy everything he had built: his faith, his family, and his ministry. More than anything, he feared the consequences of the truth. The possibility of his sins being laid bare for the world to see was a terror greater than death itself. So he kept his distance from the investigation, avoiding any unnecessary involvement, as if he were hiding something. But secrets can only stay buried for so long. Detective Langston's relentless pursuit of the truth. Detective Andrea Langston was relentless. With years of experience handling high-profile cases, she was determined to uncover the truth behind Margaret's death. Her first focus? The Carter family. As she dug deeper, she uncovered startling irregularities in Nathaniel's behavior. She examined phone records, discovering late-night calls made to an unknown number, calls that occurred just days before Margaret's murder. The timing was suspicious, too suspicious. Langston followed the lead, tracing the call logs, but the identity behind the number remained unknown. Then she turned her attention to the Carter family's financial records. What she found raised even more alarms. Large payments had been made in Margaret's name, payments that didn't match the Carter family's usual spending habits. At first glance, it could have been mistaken for simple financial support to a grieving widow. But the dates of the transactions aligned too closely with the timeline of the affair. As Langston put the pieces together, she realized that Nathaniel and Margaret's affair had been far more than a fleeting moment of weakness. It had evolved into something dangerous, consuming, and ultimately fatal. The closer she looked, the more it became evident that Margaret had become a liability, one that someone had wanted to silence. With each passing day, Langston inched closer to the terrible truth, and when it finally came to light, it would shake the entire community to its core. As Detective Andrea Langston sifted through Margaret Hayes's personal belongings, she made a discovery that would become the key piece of evidence in the case: Margaret's personal journal. The journal contained deeply personal entries, revealing her affair with Nathaniel Carter in vivid detail. She had written extensively about her pregnancy, her fears, and the looming threat that if Catherine ever found out, their entire world would collapse. One of the most chilling entries suggested that Margaret had planned to confess everything to her daughter, but she never got the chance. Her final entry hinted that she was preparing to reveal the truth, a decision that likely sealed her fate. With this journal in hand, Langston was certain Nathaniel Carter was directly involved in Margaret's murder. Langston obtained a search warrant for Nathaniel's personal belongings and his church office, leading to even more damning evidence. The most shocking discovery came with the DNA test results, confirming that Nathaniel was the father of Margaret's unborn child. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community. The very man who had preached about morality and righteousness had gone to the ultimate extreme, murder, to protect his reputation. As Nathaniel's trial began, the entire city of Houston was talking about it. The once revered pastor, a man seen as a beacon of faith, was now standing trial for murder. Sitting in the front row was Catherine Carter, her face pale and expression hollow. She had lost both her mother and her husband, not to death alone, but to betrayal. The pain she carried was evident to everyone in the courtroom. Langston, methodical as ever, presented the case flawlessly. Phone records showed suspicious late-night calls between Nathaniel and Margaret. Financial transactions revealed large payments made to Margaret, proof that he had been financially supporting her pregnancy. DNA evidence left no doubt. Nathaniel had fathered Margaret's child. But the most damning piece of evidence? Her own words exposed her fear, her desperation, and her belief that something terrible was about to happen. It was the final piece of the puzzle, making it impossible for Nathaniel to escape the truth. When Nathaniel took the stand to defend himself, he tried to explain away the evidence, calling it misinterpretation, coincidence, misunderstanding. But his confidence wavered. His words were inconsistent, his tone unconvincing. The jury, the audience, and even his own congregation members could see it. This was not a man falsely accused. As the jury delivered their verdict, the courtroom fell into silence. Nathaniel Carter was convicted of first-degree murder. Catherine's heart shattered. She had lost her mother to a brutal betrayal and her husband to his own sins. The life she thought she knew was gone forever. Nathaniel was sentenced to life in prison, his reputation forever stained. The Evergreen Church, once a thriving place of faith and community, collapsed under the weight of scandal. Congregants abandoned it, unable to reconcile the man they had followed with the monster he had become. For Detective Langston, this case was unforgettable. It had taught her a hard lesson. Secrets have consequences, and even those who preach the loudest about morality may be hiding the darkest truths. Nathaniel Carter never imagined that his legacy would end this way, not as a revered man of faith, but as a disgraced murderer. This case became a painful reminder to the world. The ones who preach the hardest about virtue are sometimes the ones hiding the deepest sins. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. And like this video for more true crime video, don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comment section below. Take care, and see you in the next video.